this morning I want to talk about the rare occurrence of people that say they've had a great childhood. And the reason why that comes up is because, usually when I do the work that I do, it always comes up that the pattern or negative pattern and belief that they've been seeing in the relationship right now can always track back to the childhood. So if they feel like they've been abandoned or betrayed in their adult relationship, usually there's a tracking right back to their childhood. And what psychology says is usually it's between the womb and 7 or 8 years old is when we get those signals. And we are, as our egoic mind identifies with those signals as an identity, we kind of loop into that as like a um, external validation of who we are. But we, as the I am presence, are kind of in the background, just kind of noticing this and just by default saying yes to this until, something happens and we have a big blow up or something that causes us to look back and see what our patterns are, which again track back to the childhood. But there have been a few instances when I've talked to someone and they've got something going on in the relationship. They're attracting some kind of imbalance or something, and we start talking about the child and they go, well, I don't, it has to be from right here, it has to be from this person or caused by this person in front of me because I've had a great childhood. And I can't help but just kind of take a deep breath and not have a smirk on my face, because I know even when someone says I've had a great childhood, when you part of the percentage of them, they really haven't had a great childhood. For one, I remember talking to a guy and he said, yeah, I had great parents and great childhood. Well, I mean, my dad was an alcoholic, but besides that, he started going into it and you start realizing that they just coped with something and then they turned it into a good childhood, or they turned their parents where it was something that they really didn't get their needs met, really get loving, nurturing attention, and they made it into something. And what I usually ask people is that, did you get tickled? Did you get loved? Did you get hugged? Did you get played with? Did someone say, I love you all the time and build you up? If there's anything, different than that, then maybe there was something that could have been improved on. So the other thing that happens is things are blocked out. So maybe the parents are really busy and they've got a couple jobs and they had all the material things given to them. So it looks like, yeah, I mean, why should I complain? I had everything given to me. Compared to other people, I've had a really good childhood. But if you dive deeper into that and say, okay, why are you here then? What is the emotional thing that keeps on being brought up? Well, I keep on attracting people that are not emotionally available. So then that tracks back to the childhood again, that the parents were not emotionally available. And you might look at that person might look at their relationship and go, God, they're good looking, they got lots of money, we got a nice house and everything's cool, but they're not emotionally available. So the childhood isn't as perfect as they once thought it to be. The other thing that can happen is when I've seen a couple, when they usually, the one that says, I've had a great childhood, my parents were perfect, they attract someone that is completely the opposite, or, pretty far the other way. And it's like this other person, their partner, has gone through all kinds of crap in their life and they've lived on the streets and they've done all this stuff. And this person, the other person that's had, the great childhood, can't really relate to that person. And that's one of the real big things that I see in these relationships, is that the person with the quote perfect childhood doesn't have empathy. They can't relate to somebody that's had a shitty childhood or that's had some abuse or something. And they do their best to connect with that. And some people will go as far as to, work the soup kitchen or work with disadvantaged kids or do something so that they can somehow engage in that and start to have some compassion and some empathy there. But it's still kind of hard. They're doing their best, but it's hard to understand it unless you've had direct experience with it. So that's the one thing that they're missing. So I remember watching Tony Robbins doing one of his gigs, and he was talking to this guy, and I'm sure I'm going to get the words wrong because it was a long time ago, but it was something to the effect of, yeah, I mean, I'm doing great. I've had a great childhood and, great parents. And he's like, I'm so sorry. That sucks. And what he was saying is that this idea that, had this great childhood, like a Leave It to Beaver, or My Three Sons childhood, is not actually as perfect as you might think. There are some things out in the world that we're going to connect with, and we're not going to be able to understand it, and we're not going to be able to have empathy for it, and we might even have some judgment for that as being separate from us. But when we have some kind of trauma or perceived trauma that causes us to engage in that, then we can understand and empathize with people, and that's when we can really connect. The other thing is, when we say that we had a perfect childhood, we're kind of bypassing the biggest, like the big elephant in the room. And the big elephant in the room, there's two of them. One is that you were separated from the womb, and the womb was the most beautiful place of nourishment. And if it wasn't, then there could be some trauma coming in through the womb from the mother into your bloodstream. And that's been proven so many times that that is a definite possibility, that trauma and at least negative emotions, things like worry and stress and feelings of abandonment, all those things can go right into the womb and right into you as the baby in the womb. But even if you don't have that, you're in the womb. And so I'll relate my own story. If I'm in the womb with my twin brother for 9 months, and we're wrapped up, and that's all we that's all we know is each other. We don't really know the outside world. All we know is this fluid, liquid, nourishing place where the stress is felt emotionally and energetically from the mother. But inside of us, we've got each other, and we've got this womb, and all of our needs are being met. Um, so it's like this perfect universe. And then the door opens, and because my brother's 4 minutes older, he leaves, and I imagine that I had some kind of trauma of abandonment or something, that that partner that I've had for 9 months, almost a full year, is suddenly left, and the environment changes, the air changes, the fluid that's been nourished me for so long is drained out of the body, and my whole universe really changes. So I imagine that there's a traumatic experience there. And then when I actually leave the womb, there's all this, spanking and measuring and weighing and, yelling and screaming and all that stuff. So that could be traumatic. So even if you can see how, even if you had a quote, perfect childhood or perfect parents, just the birth process and the gestation process, just the pregnancy could be a traumatic experience, unless you've had a mother and a father that engaged in this very peaceful at-home birth, where you were birthed into water, and it was just this sliding out into the environment, into water. Maybe it might have been different for you. And then on top of all that, sorry I'm going so deep in this, but this needs to be talked about. um, Even if you had the most perfect birth in water and with the natural home birth and no drugs and all that stuff, there's still the separation from God. So there's the idea way back inside in your subconscious or in your heart or in your body consciousness that says, I'm out here alone, and everything was cool just a moment ago, and I was one with all beings. I was one with all life. I was one with all energy. I was not separate from God. And then you have this experience, like it almost might feel like a nightmare, that how do I get out of this? So you can see how there's always something in there that can be traumatic. Um, Whether you realize it or you don't realize it, there's something back there. If you really spend some time with it, that could be a possibility. Now, if you don't have any feeling about being separate from God, that you're fine, that there might still be something there. Even if you're okay with it, there might still be something there. And the greatest effect that my counseling has with people is they say, I don't know, but I'm open. And the person that says, I don't think so, and so no, that's the person that's really close to their own healing. But the person that says, you know what, God, I can't see it, but that might be a possibility. Man, that is a huge doorway to healing. All right. So the next thing that can be and affect your childhood in a negative way is something that is not necessarily traumatic, but perceived traumatic. That means that the egoic mind, the subconscious has, or the conscious mind, I guess you'd say, has taken an incident and made it into something traumatic. So if you can think of your egoic mind as this kind of, it's on the edge all the time. What can I make myself to be? What can I identify myself with? Usually if it's a more negative thing, it has more juice to it. So that's why we're kind of pulled into believing that we are these negative aspects of ourselves. So here's one that's happened. A woman walking down the street as a 3-year-old little girl. Her grandfather comes up to hold her hand, just like a nice guy. Not traumatic, not traumatic. And then her little friend, who's also the same age, walks up, and the grandfather holds out his other hand to hold her hand. Now he's got both hands in his hands. And what the first girl says in her mind is, I'm not enough. How come he needs to go to another girl? And you can see how that would turn into an adult representation of betrayal, abandonment, not worthy, not enough, that kind of thing. So even though that incident was very innocuous and very innocent and loving, still the egoic mind is very insidious that way. So it can take something and take nothing and turn it into something. So the best thing that I found that we can do when I'm in a session with somebody is that when someone brings up the idea that they've had a great childhood or they've had great parents, then I want to honor that, but I also want to dig a little deeper and say, what is your version of a perfect childhood or perfect parents? And did you get this? And did you get that? Could it be a possibility that there was some time during your mother's pregnancy that she was feeling not enough or insignificant, or maybe that her husband might leave her? Those things that might affect your the pregnancy. And then is there any feeling from you that there might be some separation from God? I'm here. What am I here for? What am I supposed to do? How come there's no guidance for me? And that's one of the traumatic experiences that we can have. So just something to think about as you're thinking about your own childhood. If you're one of those lucky people that has not had an outwardly traumatic experience in childhood, blessings to you. And if you're attracting things in your adult life, just know that I have never ever seen um, adult trauma or adult negative relationships and problems in the relationship and problems in the life that were based solely out of what's happening right now. It always tracks back to an earlier time. There might be some time when it might have come when you're entering puberty. That's a real critical time, say around 10 to 12 years old or so. That's a time when things can get pretty dicey with trying to find yourself in the world. But even that, if you track that back down, that feeling, that even at, let's say, 12 years old, and you say, God, I had this experience in school and the kids used to pick on me or something, and you say, how did that make me feel? And you open that up to something that you might have felt in the womb or somewhere between the womb and 8 years old. So even though that you may not outwardly know about something like this, if you start to look at it and look at just the energy of it, not the actual, like, it's not really for you to really remember or get the details of that thing. If you can't remember it, that's not a big deal. In fact, it's not a deal at all. But if you can track the emotion from your childhood back, or from your adulthood to your childhood, and you can see a connection there, that's where the thing that you want to look at. is there a similar emotion that I'm feeling in my adult life to what I might have felt in my childhood? And like for me, I don't remember the womb, but I tracked mine into the womb where guilt and obligation and not feeling worthy, that kind of thing, was probably felt in the womb. So, it's not something that I remember or remember any details of, but I don't really need to. And that really helped me. For now, I'm getting to the reason why we do this is that if I can look back at it and kind of understand, okay, that's probably where it came from. I don't need to go diving into the details of all that, why it happened and when it happened and everything, but just to have some compassion there and kind of send myself maybe a different feeling of understanding and compassion and empathy back to that moment. And one of the tools that I can use for that is called the completion process, that Teal Swan created, and other people have created very similar things. But basically, it's going back into a meditation through your childhood and looking at that incident and giving that inner child, exactly what they wanted, or exactly what they needed. That could be something like talking to the parent that caused the thing, or or talking to the intruder that abused them, or bringing in help from elsewhere, Superman, Buddha, Jesus Christ, whoever you want. And it has a way of really lessening the negative energy around that incident, and that will ripple through your life. And that's how I healed my guilt that came from the womb, or what I perceived from came from the womb. So that's what I got, and I hope this helps for the people that are experiencing negative beliefs or a relationship that's on the rocks or something. And instead of pointing at this other person that, this other person has all these problems and it's all on them because they had a bad childhood. Well, it's not necessarily the case. Um, there's also energies within you, even though you had a different childhood, that has also attracted someone that would bring in that to the relationship. That's the other thing that you can go to, is that even though if your childhood was pristine, if you had no ideas of separation from God, if you had the most perfect parents and you were exalted and uplifted and edified your whole life, if that was all perfect, you still need to ask, why did I attract someone with these qualities? What's going on here? Now, man, you go into things like past life and karma and all that stuff. So the best thing that I found to do is to own it as much as I can, take responsibility for my own reactions and my own energy, and that I'm attracting this in my life, and see if I can get to a place where I can get to the source of when the whole thing was created. Then the benefit is that this stuff doesn't happen again, or at least in the way that it takes me down. So of course I still feel a little bit of guilt or obligation in these unique circumstances, but I feel it come up and I go, yeah, okay, yeah, I definitely feel some guilt there. And then I carry on with living my life through my own excitement without any guilt. So it's a real great tool to practice and to heal these long standing energies that we may have carried from childhood. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. I love you. Bless you. Have a great day.